public imagination, not only over the last 6 or 7 weeks, but over the last decade. And it was the, well, reputedly, the final episode of Line of Duty was last Sunday. And I think it threw up some really interesting points to consider. I mean, you haven't watched it, Tom, have you?
No, I haven't. So I know you watch it though, Jay. So I'll ask you some questions about it, because I know that you and lots of other people have pointed out how the writers are clearly making some statements about the state of our society and maybe politics through the writing of Line of Duty. So share with me some thoughts about that.
Well, I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, so I'm not going to be talking about the plot lines specifically or anything like that. But there are sort of 3 points that have sort of occurred to me. The first one actually is I really picked up on Series 6, and Series 6 writing very much picked upon real situations that occurred and brought it into the script. So we have one of the main integral parts of it, the theme running through the whole decade, if you like, the 6th series, is child abuse, child exploitation by powerful people. Now we know that this isn't just Line of Duty fiction. This is reality. We know the 60s and 70s, 80s, into the 90s, that cause celebs, powerful people, including politicians, including fixers, if you like, on both sides of the Atlantic, and that's we've seen in more recent times, are very much integrated into a dark, callous, vile process by which they have taken children from vulnerable positions, care homes, etc., and abused them, and in some cases murdered them. So I think Line of Duty has reflected that, and hopefully for a lot of people who watched that series, where there were subtle and not so subtle inferences to Stephen Lawrence, to Cliff Richard, to Jimmy Savile, to leading police officers, to leading politicians across the last 3 or 4 decades, etc., including, the likes of, Cyril Smith, for example, stood next to Jimmy Savile. But he's not the only one. He's the tip of the iceberg. But I think what's happening, obviously, is that we are not invited to the party in relation to understanding what really occurred. I think we're sent off on wild goose chases, usually via the media, usually by plants in the media, so that we don't actually ever get to see. I mean, there was a fascinating bit in episode 4 or 5 that basically intimated that, if you remember, the helicopter that was hovering above Cliff Richard's property, and what then happened was that the Cliff Richard and his legal team hit back at the BBC, and the BBC were forced to apologise. Now, it was very much within the programme, within the writing, it was intimated that in itself was a stitch-up. It was a fix. In other words, it wanted to nail the rumours about Cliff Richard, and at the same time, it wanted to expose the BBC, or at least make the BBC the patsy, because they were then the ones who were perceived to be intimidating him. And since that point, the story's been wrapped up. We've had decades of rumour, etc., about that particular individual. Now, I don't know whether he did anything or whether he did, but that's not the point. The point is that for so many to imply that he did, and for many other people to be identified, Leon Britton, etc., it's almost as if the system, the establishment, are so scared that if it ever came out, we'd lose faith in the political system, we'd lose faith in the police, we'd lose faith in the corporate billionaire media, that they just wanted to wrap it up, send us off on wild goose chases, and keep it hidden, keep it in the shadows. So I think the series, Line of Duty, the series, has done a great deal to hopefully get us to think about what's going on around us in reality.
You mentioned Stephen Lawrence there. In what way did the writing relate to things from the Stephen Lawrence inquiry?
We know from Stephen Lawrence inquiry, we know from the Macpherson report that there was a significant delay in the investigation process after Stephen was killed. We know that the way in which you get successful conviction is to get onto the trail as quickly as possible, whereas in his case, a week to 2 weeks went by, which allowed those people responsible to get rid of the clothes with the blood on it, get rid of the knives, get rid of anything that was perceived to be incriminating. And it later came out that there was a link in South London between senior police officers and the family of one or two of the gang who killed Stephen Lawrence, because their parents, their families were involved in organised crime. So that came out in the programme. We knew it already. And it's frightening. It's frightening that we as a population don't want to investigate, don't want to uncover what's really going on so that we can put things right. And then it becomes marginalized into a series that grabs the throat of the population and keeps them gripped for a number of weeks at a time. And yet, when that program ends on 10 o'clock on a Sunday, they go back to believing fantasy again until that hour comes along or something else replaces it further down the line. So again, I think that really invoked a real life issue in the Stephen Lawrence murder, which has been ongoing now for almost 30 years. It invoked obviously the Macpherson report and the investigation into institutionalized racism. And again, the writing in the program seemed to say that there's a denial from the top, always a denial from the top, that there's this type of behavior occurring, that it's not institutional, it's a few rotten apples. Whereas, as I say, the Macpherson report found completely different conclusions to how the power brokers perceive it, or want us to perceive it.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously not the first report to conclude that there was institutional racism operating within the police force. I've got the producer in my ear just saying that I need to mention, just for our viewers, need to just clarify that Cliff Richard was cleared of any wrongdoing and that significant blame was attached to the BBC's actions. So just to make that clear. But
I wasn't suggesting that Cliff Richard is in any way responsible. That isn't the point I'm trying to make.
No.
The point I'm trying to make is that the programme and the writing very clearly believed that there was a methodology behind the way in which we were manipulated around that issue, that the helicopter flying over Cliff Richard's house and the consequent response by Cliff Richard and his legal team to the BBC was in fact in itself manufactured. That's all the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, absolutely. People have suggested online that there was a very clear message sort of towards the end, and again, don't want you to give it, be a spoiler for people that haven't seen it, but there seemed to be some sort of message in the writing about corruption at the top, the powers that be holding, abusing their power and acting corruptly. Was that an important message that came through?
Yeah, and the metaphors galore wasn't just limited to those people at the top in terms of the policing, in terms of politics, and how they themselves are involved in shady, shall we say, goings on, that they will argue maybe is in the interests of the British population in the country. Others would argue there's no way that one could be carried out in terms of being a convincing argument. But yes, there's certainly a metaphors galore that suggests that there's people in this country in very powerful positions at the moment who we know very well who aren't serving our interests.
So how about a Series 7? Do you think the powers that be will make sure there isn't one?
I don't think I don't think there's any intention to make a Series 7. And I actually just wanted this last point is that a lot of people, because we watched it, we waited till the whole series was over and then we watched it over consecutive evenings because we prefer to do it like that. And we noticed that there was a lot of negativity about the final episode being underwhelming. Well, actually, I didn't find the final episode underwhelming at all. I found the final episode reflecting reality. It wasn't going to be a nice, sweet ending with everybody locked up in prison and, you know, all the powers that be, the corrupts were being outed and, you know, the key was thrown away. It was never going to be like that because that isn't reality. The reality is that these people are so entrenched and so powerful and so influential and they're surrounded by powerful and influential people that bringing them down means bringing a lot of other things down with it. And that isn't going to happen, not unless we all unify and say we've had enough. But until that point, I think what the last episode of Line of Duty was excellent. It reflected exactly how British society is, and not just British society, but multiple societies are in terms of the corrupt influences